What's up, Einsteinatics? Have you ever wondered why you have similar characteristics with your parents or siblings? Or baka ikaw ay nagtataka kung bakit ikaw lang ang naiiba sa iyong pamilya? So bago ka mag-emote na ikaw lang ang naiiba at mag-isip na baka ampun ka, makinig muna. At baka dito mo malalaman ang kasagutan. Today, we are going to activate all our brain cells in learning about locations of genes in chromosomes, and not just that. Ipapaliwanag din natin kung paano namamana ang mga katangian from parents to offspring. So let's have fun and enjoy while learning. Gentle reminders before proceeding. Feel free to pause the video anytime to soak up the concepts. Pause the video, especially when answering the assessments or activities. You may use separate papers for your answers, or you may download the module provided by the link on the video description. And most important of all, please don't forget to subscribe so that you will be updated for more educational videos. So to start with, let us define what is trait. Actually, when we talk about trait, ito ay tumutukoy sa mga katangian. So yung trait is an observable or an inherited characteristic of an organism which is usually pinapamana from parent, and it is determined by genes. So these traits explains why people are similar or meron silang pagkakatulad, but not necessarily identical or completely alike. So these traits makes you unique and one of a kind. Yung mga katangiang namamana is also known as inherited traits. This explains kung bakit merong magkakamuka sa buong pamilya at meron namang hindi. Now, you could clearly see from our example as to how traits are distributed or being inherited from one generation to the next. You could clearly see the color of the eyes, the color of the hair, from their grandparents down to their grandchildren. Question? What makes this baby human? And what do you think determines its gender? Do you have any idea? In all living things, characteristics o yung katangian ay ipinapasa sa pamamagitan ng chromosomes na namana from their parents. Lahat ng human characteristic, kabilang din yung gender, must be something to do with chromosomes. Do you have any idea kung saan matatagpuan ang chromosomes? Made of? Baka nagtataka ka kung saan ba gawa ang katawan ng tao. So we are going to find out how and where is the genetic information carried in the body. So let's start. From your previous levels, you already know that the body is made up of different organs. And from these organs, these are made up of tissues. Skin is one of the many different types of tissues in the body. So can you still remember what are tissues made of? Yes, tissues are made up of cells. These cells are the building blocks of tissues. Different tissues are made up of different cells that carry out different roles. Where is the genetic information found in most cells? Any idea? Saan ba matatagpuan yung genetic information? What particular cell organelle? Okay. So, the genetic materials are located in the nucleus. The nucleus is also considered the control center of the cell. Each nucleus contains long strands of genetic information. Can you still remember what are these strands called? These strands are called chromosomes. Chromosomes now carry the genetic information located in the nuclei of cells. In most cells, chromosomes are matched in pairs. And how do genes relate to chromosomes? Genes is a separate section of a chromosome and controls a separate characteristic. There are hundreds of genes on each chromosome. What do you think are genes and chromosomes made of? That is what we are about to find out as we go on with our discussion. So what are chromosomes? Chromosomes are long strands of genetic information which is located in the nuclei of cells. And based on your previous lessons, we all know that when you talk about the nucleus, it is the control center of the cell. Chromosomes are most visible or mas madali siyang makita during cell division and when they replicate and look like this one. So here is a picture or a diagram of a chromosome. So later on, we are going to take up the different structures or the different parts of a chromosome. Now let's take a closer look on the structure of a chromosome. Tingnan natin kung ano ba yung mga basic parts ng isang chromosome. So first off, the two identical chromatids. So ito rin ay tinatawag na sister chromatids. So ito yon, itong dalawang to. So this is one is an exact copy of the other and each contains one DNA molecule. Kaya nga siya tinatawag na sister chromatids kasi magkapareha sila. Yung mahabang part or arm ng chromosome ay tinatawag na Q-arm. Okay? And yung mas maikli naman, ito naman yung tinatawag na P-arm. So ito yon. This is the P-arm and yung mas mahaba ay tinatawag na Q-arm. Kung saan nagmi-meet itong dalawang sister chromatids na to, ito ay tinatawag na centromer. Okay? These are the constricted point of the chromosome. So, what we have discussed kanina, yung chromosome ay binubuo ng DNA molecule. So, this is a long string DNA molecule formed into a compact structure by proteins called histones. So, yung histones ngayon, dito pumupulupot yung DNA molecule. Now, let's take up homologous chromosomes. Ano nga ba yung ibig sabihin ng homologous chromosomes? So, pag sinabing homologous chromosomes, these are chromosomes that are matched in pairs based on their size and shape. So, maling-mali yung sinabi mo na mana ka lang sa mama mo or mana ka lang sa papa mo kasi in order to make you have inherited the trait 1/2 from your mother and 1/2 from your father. So, matching pairs of chromosomes are called homologous chromosomes. And where do homologous comes from? So, as what I have said earlier, nanggaling ito. Bawat pares ay nanggaling sa iyong parent. One from your mother and another from your father. Sa kabuuan, ang human body ay binubuo ng 46 chromosomes. So, how many pairs of homologous chromosomes are there in the human body? So, there are 23 pairs of chromosomes. So, bakit 23? Kasi you inherit half of your chromosomes from your mother and half from your father. So, if you are going to add all this one, you have a total of 46 chromosomes. Now, let's proceed with genes. Ano nga ba ang genes? Pag sinabing genes, it refers to a short length of DNA on a chromosome which is a unit determining an inherited character. Sa madaling sabi, pag sinabing gene, ito ay isang parte ng DNA na kumokontrol sa katangian ng tao. Merong gene na kumokontrol sa kulay ng mata, kulay ng skin, meron ding gene na kumokontrol sa klase ng buhok at intelligence at iba pa. Yung gene ay binubuo ng chemical substance called deoxyribonucleic acid or DNA. Do you still remember the structure of the chromosome? Members of homologous chromosomes carry the same genes, controlling the same character in the same location. But it doesn't mean that these genes may be of different forms. As you can see here, that although they carry the gene for the skin color, but it doesn't mean that they are the same. Based on this example, you can see that one carries the gene for the white skin and the other one carries the gene for a dark skin color. So ano ba yung magiging kakalabasan ng isang organism? Yung white ba or yung dark skin color? Ito yung sagot sa question natin kanina. Yung overall appearance ng isang organism ay nakadepende sa dalawang bagay. Yung una is its genes or yung inherited characteristics, which is passed galing sa parents to their offspring. The other one is the effects of the environment in which it lives. Lahat ng mga observable characteristic, meaning nakikita sa organism, ito ay tinatawag na phenotype. Yung full sets of genes naman, both yung nakatago at yung na-express, ito naman ay tinatawag na genotype. Yung organism's phenotype therefore depends on its genotype plus the environmental effects. Kung ano yung magiging itsura or magiging katangian ng isang organism ay combination siya ng phenotype, meaning yung naman ng genes, at saka yung kanyang environmental effects o yung epekto ng environment. So kabilang na dyan yung nutrition, yung type of habitat that it lives, and others. Balikan natin yung discussion natin kanina about sa different versions of genes. As we all know, chromosomes in a homologous pair contains the same type of genes that code for the same characteristics such as eye color. We have here an example. The two sister chromatids has these alleles. Yung isa ay it codes for brown eyes, yung isa naman ang code nito is for blue eyes. So ano nga ba yung allele? Yung bawat version or yung magkaibang version ng isang gene ay tinatawag na allele. Merong dalawang klase ng alleles. Yung una ay tinatawag na homozygous. Pag yung alleles sa isang homologous pair ay magkapareho, ito ay tinatawag na homozygous. Here is an example. As you can see, both of the chromatids have the allele for brown eyes, and yung isa naman, both of the alleles for the sister chromatids codes for blue eyes. So pag magkapareho, ito ay tinatawag na homozygous alleles. Another type of alleles is what you call as heterozygous alleles. This happens if the alleles for a characteristic in homologous pairs are different. So pag magkaiba na siya. So the organism is said to be heterozygous for that characteristic. So here's an example of heterozygous alleles. Example natin kanina is yung nagko-code para sa mata. As you can see, yung isa ay merong allele for brown eyes, yung isa naman merong allele for blue eyes. Question: so ano ba yung magiging eye color or kakalabasan ng kulay ng mata ng isang organism? Mag-i-introduce tayo ng another terms. Ito ay nakadepende kung anong allele yung dominant at kung anong allele naman yung recessive. Ano nga ba ang pagkakaiba ng dominant sa recessive allele? Remember, dito nakadepende kung ano yung kakalabasan or kung ano magiging itsura ng isang organism or yung kanyang phenotype. When you talk about dominant allele, ito yung katangian na palaging na-express. In this case, sa ating example, ito yung brown eyes. On the other hand naman, pag tinawag namang recessive allele, ito yung mga allele na nakikita lang pag wala or hindi existing yung dominant allele. Pag nakikita naman or pag meron namang dominant allele, itong recessive allele ngayon is masked or nakatago. So in this case, it would be now the blue eyes. So here is an example kung paano i-represent yung alleles. Pag ang isang allele ay dominant, it is written in capital. Pag ang isang allele naman ay recessive, it is written in small caps. Here is an example. Yung Drosophila or yung langaw, meron siyang pakpak na either long or short. Pag parehong dominant yung kanyang allele, so it is written in all caps. It is known as homozygous dominant. Of course, yung kanyang phenotype or yung kakalabasan ng organism is it has long wings. Pang ang isang organism naman ay heterozygous, as you can see. Yung isa is written in caps or big letter, yung isa naman small letter. So, since yung isa is dominant pa rin, meron pa rin siyang dominant allele for long wings. So, of course, yung kanyang phenotype is meron pa rin siyang mahabang pakpak. On this case naman, pareho siyang recessive, meaning walang dominant allele. Then, it is known as homozygous recessive. So, dito lang lalabas yung pagkakaroon ng maikling pakpak. Gregor Johann Mendel is considered to be the father of genetics kasi siya ay isa sa kauna-unahang tao who studied genetics. He is an Austrian monk who conducted his study during the 1850s and 1860s. Yung ginamit niyang variable or ginamit niyang specimen for his experiment is yung pea plants. And he established the basic foundations of inheritance such as the dominant and the recessive characteristics. Mendel had no knowledge of DNA due to the limitations of technology of that time, but he did identify that inheritance is particulate, or it depends on the transfer of separate factors from parents to offspring, meaning yung mga factors or katangian ay namamana or naipapasa galing sa parent papunta dun sa kanilang mga anak or sa offsprings. After sa kanyang research, Mendel proposed two laws of inheritance. The first law is known as the law of segregation o yung pagkakaiba-iba. This states that alternate versions of genes or alleles causes variation in inherited characteristics. And the reason is that yung organism inherits these two alleles for each characteristic, one from each parent. That's why the offspring is unique from each parent because it inherited the characteristic from both parents. 23 chromosomes from the mother and 20 chromosomes from the father. And dominant alleles will always mask recessive alleles. The two alleles for each characteristic separate during gamete production. And the second law is known as the law of independent assortment, that genes for different characteristics are sorted independently during gamete production. Mendel's work was later confirmed and supported by the chromosomal theory of inheritance, which was proposed in 1902 by Walter Sutton and Theodore Boveri, wherein they developed the chromosome theory of inheritance. This was a link between mitosis, meiosis, and Mendel's finding. So basically, this theory states that Mendelian genes have a specific locus on the chromosome and that chromosomes undergo segregation and independent assortment during meiosis. That's why an offspring is a blend of a chromosome of the two parents from the mother and the father. Now let's proceed to DNA. Based on our discussion, we all know that chromosomes under genes are made up of a molecule called DNA. Ano nga uli yung ibig sabihin ng DNA? DNA is known as deoxyribonucleic acid. So each chromosome is a very long molecule of a tightly coiled DNA. DNA is what you call as the blueprint of life. DNA molecules carry the code that controls what your cells are made of and what they do. Which part of a DNA molecule holds this information? Do you have any idea? We are going to discuss more on that later on. Now, let us pick up from where we left off. Alam natin na yung body ay binubuo ng Very good. Iba't ibang klaseng organ. At yung mga organs na to ay binubuo ngayon ng tissues. And as we all know, ano nga uli yung bumubuo sa mga tissues? Yung mga tissues ay binubuo ng iba't ibang klase ng cells. At from these cells, where do you think are the genetic information stored? Yes, it is stored in the nucleus. Ayan. So from the nucleus, as you can see, it contains long strands of genetic information. Ano nga uli yung tawag sa mga strands na to na nagko-contain ng genetic information? Yes, they are called as chromosomes. And from these chromosomes, as you can see, there are hundreds of genes on each chromosome. At bawat isang gene controls a separate characteristic or trait. Now, from here, ano nga uli? What are genes and chromosomes made of? From here, they are made up of DNA. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Each chromosome is a very long molecule of tightly coiled DNA. So from the DNA, as you can see, its structure is what is known as the double helix. The DNA in your chromosomes carry the unique genetic code that controls your cells. And from here, the DNA molecule has 4 types of bases. Meron siyang apat na klase na bases. So, tingnan natin. The bases have complicated names, so their initials can be used instead. We are going to learn about that one later on, but for now, we are going to use the initials E, C, G, and T to represent the DNA bases. Now let's proceed with DNA and the base pairs. Yung rungs of the DNA ladder are made from pairs of bases. Based on our previous discussions, we all know that the 4 types of bases consist of adenine for letter A, cytosine for letter C, guanine, letter G, and letter T for thymine. Itong mga bases na to always pairs together in the same way. Do you still remember kung paano sila nag-prepare or kung ano yung mga magkaka-partner? Here's an important note. The rules for base pairing are, yung adenine always pairs with thymine, at yung cytosine naman always pairs with guanine. Hindi pwedeng mag-pair si adenine sa guanine or si cytosine to thymine. Itong dalawa palagi yung magka-partner, A to T at saka yung C to G. So kahit milyong-milyong base pairs pa yan, it always follows the same rule. A pairs with T at C pairs with G. So ito ngayon, yung bumubuo yung sequence na to, yung bumubuo ngayon sa DNA molecule. And it would form now the genetic code. Ganun lang ka-simple. The structure of the DNA also contains the nucleotides. Ano nga ba yung nucleotides? Yung nucleotides are the nitrogen-containing organic substances that forms the basis of the nucleic acids for DNA and RNA. All nucleotides contains the following 3 groups. Yung isa, pinakauna, is the phosphate group. Next one is the sugar. And the third one, yung diniscuss natin kanina, yung nitrogen-containing base, either adenine, guanine, cytosine, or thymine. In the basis for comparison between DNA and RNA, yung DNA is deoxyribose, yung sa RNA naman is ribose. In addition to what we have discussed kanina, dagdagan pa natin yung knowledge ninyo with regards to nitrogenous bases. Aside sa 4, actually meron pang isa. We have discussed already that adenine, guanine, these are purine bases, and the other ones, thymine, cytosine, to include also uracil are pyrimidine bases. Now, yung DNA contains adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine, whereas yung RNA naman or yung ribonucleic acid contains adenine, guanine, uracil, and cytosine. A challenge for 30 seconds. Can you rearrange these items in order of size with the largest first? Can you do it for 30 seconds? Sige nga, try nyong i-arrange from pinakamalaki down sa pinakamaliit based on our discussion earlier. So of course, let us see. Any idea? 30 seconds. Okay, so time's up. So let us see if our answer is correct. So let us check. So first one will be the cell. Okay, so that's the correct order. Of course, the largest would be the cell, followed by the nucleus. Next would be the chromosome, and as we all know, the chromosomes contains the genes. Now the gene contains the DNA, and of course the DNA contains the base pair, the A, G, T, and C. So congratulations to those who got it correct. So can you match these genetic terms to their definitions? So meron ka lang 30 seconds para i-arrange sa mga terms based sa kanilang description. Okay, so 15 seconds left. Ayan. So hanapan mo kung ano yung meaning ng heterozygous, yung recessive, yung allele, yung dominant at saka homozygous based sa ating discussion kanina. Okay, so time is up. So let us check your work. Ayan. So as you can see, that is the correct answer. Okay, so let us try the short quiz about the structure of the DNA. So question number 1. Chromosomes under genes are made up of DNA. So what does DNA stands for? A, B, C, or D? Which do you think is the correct answer for the question? Okay, time's up. Actually, the correct answer would be letter D, deoxyribonucleic acid. For question number 2, which of the following is not made up of DNA? A, B, C, or D? Is it chromosomes, genes, proteins, or chromosome copies? Definitely, the correct answer here is proteins. Let's move on to the next one. So what type of subunits make up a DNA molecule? Is it acids, bases, bases, or genes? So it's obvious that the correct answer here is, of course, the 4 nitrogenous bases. So what would be now the structure of the DNA? Is it single helix, double helix, triple helix, or curly helix? Okay, correct answer would be letter B, double helix. For number 5, what are the 4 letters that represents the DNA bases? Is it A, letter B, letter C, or D? Of course, the correct answer here is letter A. A stands for adenine, C for cytosine, G for guanine, and T for thymine. Let's proceed to the next one. Which of these is not a DNA-based pair? Or mali yung pagkakapares nila. Remember na hindi pwedeng magkapalit yung mga nitrogenous bases. So is it A, G to C, letter B, A to G, letter C, T to A, or letter D, C to G? So kung nag-pay attention kayo kanina, it is very clear that The correct answer here is letter B. Siya yung hindi tama yung pagkakaparehas. Remember na yung adenine, palaging partner si thymine or yung A to T. Si guanine naman always pairs up with cytosine, J to C. Okay? Okay, so number 7. How many copies of a DNA molecule are made up before a cell divides? So yung terms of replication based from your previous lessons. So as we all know, it only makes A, B, C, or D. It only makes one copy. Ayan. For number 8, what is the first stage of copying a DNA molecule? Is it A, new bases move in, bases pair up, new double strands are formed, or letter D, it splits into single strands? Correct answer is it letter D? Ayan, splits into single strands. Number 9, what do you call if there is a mistake in the coding of or the copying of the DNA? Is it A, mutation, B, variation, C, permutation, or letter D, motivation? Okay, so the obvious answer here is mutation. And for the last question, the sequence of bases on a DNA molecule is also known as, is it Morse code, green cross code, highway code, or the genetic code? Definitely, that would be the genetic code. And well done. Perfect score.